Let's just start at the core of the authority principle, like any other principle of persuasion. So what this is that we defer, we suspend our critical thinking because of somebody in authority, right? And so we want to remember that this isn't an on-off switch. It's a dial on how well it works or it doesn't work, depending upon the context and the optimal conditions. So I had just 2 or 3 emails, but I had probably a dozen comments about the authority principle, how just mentioning that somebody had a badge in a retail store, like a store you get phone service, or Apple Store was a popular one, that would suffice and that would kick in the authority principle. All right, well, let's just start that. What you did just there is you walked up to the building, authority principle building, and you didn't even go in, right? So like I said, it's a dial, right? You want to go in a building and you want to go up to the penthouse to understand the full authority principle and the psychological levers that impact on how we suspend our critical thinking and we succumb to the authority principle. And then, of course, how can we use this to be influential? All right, let's just talk about that dial scenario I talked about. So let's say that you're walking over a walking bridge, right? And there's someone there and they're like, hey, can you not, no pictures, not stop, keep moving. You got to keep moving. You got to keep moving. The amount of people that are going to comply is going to be, probably, some. However, the moment that that person standing on the bridge puts on an orange vest, like the kind you see at a construction site, the compliance rate is going to skyrocket. So what's going on is that it's a low stakes and high compliance because the stakes are low, right? It's like someone's telling me to move along. They have an orange vest on. I'm just on a bridge. Not that big a deal, right? Low stakes, high compliance, they move on. And so now let's go back to the common scenario that most people seem to bring up with me to illustrate this is, hey, I went into a store, an Apple store, and the person had their name and it said Apple. So that established them as an authority figure in Apple. Well, that doesn't really get us there because what's going on is everybody who works at every store is going to have a branded shirt and most likely a name tag or maybe even a lanyard, right? So it gets us there, but it loses that dial, right? It's all turned all the way down. So if you walk into an Apple store or any store and you're going to buy a $20 phone case, does Apple Store even have anything for $20? I don't think so. Anyway, let's say they do. You're going to buy a $20 phone case. Well, anybody in the Apple Store who works there and has an Apple shirt and a little name tag, Candace, right? Right, it's probably enough authority. That the stakes for us is pretty low. It's a $25 phone case. However, if you're going to buy a I'm going to go to the Samsung Fold, even though they don't sell that at the Apple Store, because I don't know if Apple has the Fold phone yet. Let's say you're at another store, right? And it's the Samsung Fold, which is like $2,000, right? The stakes are much higher. So it's not just somebody coming over with that name badge and their shirt, the non-Apple store at the Samsung store, right? And so all of a sudden it's like, well, now the stakes need to be, the stakes are higher. So the authority needs to be higher. The context needs to be higher. So in that case, if someone said, I am the Samsung certified technician, right? Okay, well, that now ups that a little bit, right? And so us for a higher stakes of $2,000 for a phone, now we're more likely to suspend our critical thinking on the Samsung certified technician. All right, so now let's look at it as through the eyes of that famous Milgram experiment, where an actor in a lab coat would direct volunteers to shock people, shock being in quotes because they didn't really get shocked. And so the researchers, what they wanted to do, Milgram, what he wanted to do is he wanted to see how far people would go. It was a dial, right? I talked about the dial, but this is a literal dial. How far they would go, the voltage and shocking them. And so it was surprising at how many people blindly followed this actor who was a researcher who's wearing a lab coat by design to look the part, right, to give the appearance of some authority, right? And so now let's look at that through the context of the dial that we talked about, right? So if the research study, this guy in the lab coat, if he was standing in the middle of the street or in the corner of the corner somewhere and asked you to shock people, well, you wouldn't do it, right? So we have to realize that the level, right, of the context of the situation, that's going to help determine. In this case, it was at Yale. So everybody who was participating, right, they were in the Yale building. That comes with a lot of authority right off the bat. And now you have a professor or researcher, even though this particular person for that experiment was an actor, right? You think it's a professor and a researcher and he's in a lab coat. All of these things work together. So the high stakes of shocking someone repeatedly and continuing on the intensity of the voltage, right? Those high stakes required a higher level of perceived authority, right? So go back to the person on the bridge, right, with the orange vest. I'm walking across the bridge. I don't care, right? Low stakes, right? I'm buying a $25 phone case, low stakes. I'm buying a $2,000 phone, higher stakes. I'm going to shock somebody, right? Like give them a shock, hurt them, cause them pain, right? Much higher stakes. And so that level of authority needs to move up. So there's a couple things I want to get across is the stopping at the building of the principle of authority and just looking at it and saying, oh, a name badge is cool. No, you got to go in and you got to go up to the top, because there's more to it than simply having a name badge, because you are not going to suspend your critical thinking just because somebody has a name badge if the stakes are mildly high to high stakes, right? You may do it if it's just walking across the bridge. All right, so the final takeaway is that when the stakes are high, the persuasive communicator must stack the authority symbols: a lanyard, a name badge, a white lab coat, being in a Yale research facility, right? Boom, boom, boom. That's stacking it. So every time that the stakes of what you want somebody to fall into compliance with, you want to get them to a yes, right? The stakes go up, that authority needs to go up. So what you want to remember, it's not just somebody having a name badge.